to the Thursday, December 12th, 2019 edition of the Clemson Dubcast. Weird week. Clemson doesn't get back to the practice fields until tomorrow, Friday. No press conferences or anything like that. Beyond the one later this afternoon in Atlanta, just sort of the same song and dance with the four playoff coaches. Working on a story right now for TigerIllustrated.com, looking back at the transfers from Clemson. Was it the smartest thing in the world for some of these guys to leave? Kelly Bryant, Tavian Feaster. We will explore that. Also, Paul Strelo has an update this morning on as the Birch world turns. Sounds like Clemson is still in it. Be sure to stay tuned for TigerIllustrated.com for more. Also, if you're stumped on Christmas gift ideas, what a better gift than TigerIllustrated.com, a year subscription. So, just throwing it out there. Our title sponsor of the Dubcast from way back in the beginning, August of 2018, Parham Smith & Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. Blake Smith, a good friend of mine, he's been representing plaintiffs in medical negligence and other personal injury cases for over 15 years. Blake serves on the advisory board for the paralegal program at Greenville Technical College. He recently completed his 10th year as an adjunct pro bono professor at Clemson University, where he teaches sports law. Blake was also featured in a recent Consumer Reports heart surgery risk article. In other words, Blake and everybody else at Parham Smith & Archenhold know what the heck they're doing. Free consultations, 864-990-4581 or online at parhamlaw.com. Our newest podcast sponsor, been with us for a few months now, Blackacre Law Firm, sister law firm of Parham Smith & Archenhold in Greenville. Stuart James is a 1998 Clemson grad, big Clemson fan, just like the Parham Smith & Archenhold family. Blackacre gives you the representation you can depend on when you're on the home stretch, closing on your house, all those documents you're signing, all those technical aspects of it. The last thing you want is for something to go wrong at that point. Blackacre also provides services for wills, powers of attorney, durable, and healthcare. Don't put yourself and your family in a bad situation by not having these important documents. Call today for a consultation, 864-775-5400, or go to their website, blackacrelawfirm.com. That's BLACKACRE lawfirm.com. Okay, our guest this week, really looking forward to this. Ellis Johnson and Dabo go back a long ways. Ellis is full of stories about the old days, about the more recent days, and about the state of things right now. Here we go. Enjoy. Okay, joined by Ellis Johnson. Man, you've been frequently requested for interviews from Clemson fans, people interested to hear your thoughts on Clemson and a lot of other stuff. So really happy that we're finally doing this.
Well, it's good to be on with you. I do a few little radio spots in the fall, one in Tuscaloosa and a couple out of Columbia. And it's fun to be able to keep up with the sport a little bit, being out on the outside. And so looking forward to our conversation.
So a year out or a season out of coaching, what has this been like for you?
Well, in the beginning it was fine. I was spending a little more time with my children and enjoying that. But I had a family situation where I couldn't move for 2 seasons. Could not relocate. So obviously in this profession you can't chase jobs if you can't relocate. So that really gave me a 2-year period there out of the network, and it's just so difficult. Time just flies. Although it is a production business, it's also a networking business, and the personal side of it is very important when you're trying to have opportunities to be hired. I have learned with my time out that I'm not a very good retiree. My health is good, and I don't have any really serious, dedicated hobbies. So I'm trying to get back in coaching and hope I'll find a good opportunity to do that.
And you're living at the beach, right?
I've moved from Columbia down to the beach.
Okay. Does time away give you any sort of different perspective on, I guess, your priorities? You just said you want to get back into coaching, so I guess that's a stupid question, but I'm just curious if you have any different sort of views on your situation now versus when you first got out, I guess.
Not really. It is a very time-consuming profession, and it's a very structured profession most times of the year. So I went from 42 years of everything being laid out that I had to do and when I had time free and when I was working. And this has been totally different. And I don't know if I'm a good self-starter. I'm a very hard-working guy. I think I got great work habits. But sometimes I can't initiate the process. But I have found that trying to utilize your free time in a productive manner, something that makes you feel better about yourself and you enjoy it, something fulfilling, and also something that's worth your time and effort. It's very difficult when you retire unless you have some, real dedicated hobby that you're into. So it's been a little different in that aspect, but just trying to find what I enjoy doing each day and what I look forward to doing each day, because I'm not a person who can sit around and be idle.
Yeah, I mean, so much structure is sort of your identity as a coach and what you are. So what have you found that occupies that time in a fulfilling, I guess, way?
The vast majority of it is my kids. Mm-hmm. And I'm 67 years old, but I've got teenage kids. And one of them is in his first year of college, and the other two are still in high school. So their activities keep me pretty busy, and I also have to travel to them a little bit now, so that takes time. But the majority of my time now centers around their activities. And I would, if I was fortunate to get back in, that is something I would miss. It's been fun to be able to make it to any of their games or their plays or their daughter rides equestrian. I've been to 3 of those. And, it's just those things. If I had my schedule was tightened up again, I couldn't make it to those, I would probably miss that a little bit. But I still would be a lot happier having more to do and having a coaching situation.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but when Will Muschamp got the job at South Carolina, you joined him as an analyst in Columbia, and was that your position the entirety of that time?
Yeah, all I did, I stayed there about 18 months, and I did a lot of film study for him, did a little bit of our self-scout and gave him some things that I saw, but also stayed about a week ahead looking at opponents, just trying to pull up anything about personnel or tendencies and these kind of things. Had no contact with the players and really didn't enjoy that part of it. The first year was fun, just being around some new coaches. I always enjoyed over my career moving and getting in with new coaching staffs and new ideas and things of that nature. And so that first year was enjoyable to that extent, but I didn't have any contact with the players. And so I really didn't enjoy the position and decided to leave it.
So that was your call?
But both. It was mutual. I told him I needed a change of assignment, something different in the job description, or I wasn't going to do it anymore. Okay.
I know you and Dabo go back a long ways, and I'm just curious to get your thoughts on what he has constructed, a program that is now arguably, some people would say inarguably, at the very top of the college football world, just in the sort of the shape that they're in and the national titles in recent years and the ability to do it again this year and beyond. What's your general sort of take on what he has done here?
Well, first, specifically Dabo, I'm not surprised he's successful. The character, work habits, so forth. Even when he was a young coach, and we worked together over at Alabama, he always had that. He always had a little vision. He always was hardworking. He wasn't a grinder. Didn't stay with that 10, 11, and 12 every night. But he was he was always active. He recruited year-round. It was a little bit ahead of the recruiting process back then, and just did an outstanding job. And this was a young man. He played for us, and I left and went to Clemson for 3 years, and Dabo was in the weight room as a strength GA. And then when I got back, he had been on staff, I think, only 1 year with Woody. Woody was coordinator, and Dabo moved into the wide receivers. So he was like 23, 24, I don't know, maybe a little older. But he was in his 20s when he began coaching in the SEC and just was, I think, way beyond his years. Unfortunately, we all were terminated about 2-3 years later, and he didn't find a coaching job. And he was successful in business. He went out, he was in commercial real estate, and I think mainly what he was doing was handling the leasing of these strip malls that the guy was building, or either he was buying the land or the property to build the strip malls. But it was something you'd say is totally unrelated to coaching, and he had no experience for it, but he was tremendously successful. So successful, I think, that it took him a while to get back in coaching because he wasn't going to leave that job for just an average coaching job. So, and then came to Clemson, of course. So the vision, the work habits, the energy, and just football knowledge, too. I mean, he had everything. What has surprised me more is the overall progress of Clemson, because I've worked there before, and I actually grew up in a Clemson family. My father was a Clemson graduate. So we were, quote, a Clemson family. And Clemson had never had the resources and the financial commitments that they seem to have now. It's, what the commitment and the efforts they've made to be at a national level is just tremendous. But I credit some of Dabo's vision for taking them that direction. But to do what they've done and to be where they are right now, it takes a lot more than one head coach. And I think what he's done has been phenomenal, the people he's surrounded himself with and so forth. But I think you have to look above him. I credit Terry Don Phillips for the tremendous amount of it, because during the first 4 or 5 years when things weren't all perfect, he stuck right behind him and kept anybody who felt like it was a wrong decision from making any kind of decisions, and it proved right. I think Terry Don could see that the recruitment was there, and the vision and ideas that Dabo, where he wanted to take the program, were best for Clemson. And you've got a board of trustees and an administration now that is on the same track. And when you get everybody pulling in the same direction, an institution can really be on a roll. When you're playing in college football, it's hard enough to win a game when you're all on the same page. When you've got infighting or disagreements on where you want the place to be in 10 years, then it's hard to be successful. You got enough problems beating your opponent. Now you got to win arguments and fights inside. So overall, I'm just, amazed by the things that the institution has accomplished. And it's not just football. They've done a lot of good things in a lot of areas. But I think what we're discussing now is the overall state of that program and where it was maybe 30, 40 years ago. And it's just phenomenal what the institution has done in their vision and their commitment and what they've done up there facility-wise and so forth. I also think the growth of the overall area up there has contributed to it, because it's a very vibrant region now.
I have to ask you, as you mentioned, the importance of alignment up and down the chain of command, from the coach to the AD to the president, the board of trustees, and that sort of line there. Your history at South Carolina, obviously they've been in the news recently with various trustees coming out and giving their thoughts on whether or not they could buy out Will Muschamp, and then the president having seemingly a statement every day about his thoughts on the future of the football program and what needs to happen. Just curious what your opinion is on the disparity between the two programs in terms of that alignment and lack thereof, if that's fair.
Well, I don't think it's that much difference. What I do think that Clemson's done is they've had a vision and they've had a course they've stayed on. And, of course, winning helps everybody do that. I think South Carolina has a vision also, and I know their board of trustees know several of them extremely well. I know what they want for that program. In fact, they probably spend more money than Clemson. However, they haven't won, and so everybody starts to question things, and you have more turnover. They've had only 2 presidents in the last, I think, 12 years, so there hadn't been instability there. The new president has barely gotten his feet wet, so he obviously, some of the issues he's had to deal with the media are things that he's probably not done before. Kind of a coincidental fact, he and I were teammates at West Point on the freshman team. And I don't know him extremely well, but I do remember Bob, and great guy. But his experience has been over 30-something years in the military and has been superintendent at West Point. And there's some similarities. but that's not, you don't deal with the social media and the sports media and the alumni groups the same way you do at a university that you do at West Point. So I'm sure some of those things are new to him. There are times where people don't have to say anything and they make a comment. There's nothing wrong with the comment, but it's not necessary, and it's not productive. So it's better just to leave it alone and let those who are responsible for it deal with it directly. You're going to have all those questions when you have a coaching controversy where some people want to change and some people don't. And it's better, I think, that many people above that just stay out of it, make a decision, and move on.
Digging back into your history with Dabo, your first year at Alabama on the defensive staff was 1990, which I think, wasn't that his first year on the team as a walk-on?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know he had just walked on. I think he played for a year for Coach Bowden as a receiver coach before we got there, because that was where their relationship began, and, of course, how he got to Clemson. But I think Dabo played a year, maybe two, before then. But he was definitely on our 1992 national championship team, and I think he was a senior that year.
Yep, he was.
And I stayed one more year. He worked in the strength room, I think, that 93 season. And then, like I said, I left for Clemson 94, 5, and 6. And when I came back, Coach Stallings had made a change at his offensive coordinator position. Woody McCorvey, who's Dabo's operations officer now, he was moved into the coordinator spot and coached quarterbacks, and Dabo took over the wide receivers. And I think I've got that timeline correct, but I think he had played a couple of seasons before we got there.
I don't know how much, in general, that a defensive coach pays, how much attention a defensive coach pays to a walk-on receiver, but I'm just curious if you can recall, like, your first interactions and impressions of Dabo when you met him during that time.
I can't really recall much. Woody was his position coach, and Woody and I are very close. We've worked together at Alabama and over at Mississippi State, and it had something to do with me. Bill Oliver actually had a lot to do with me getting on that staff, because I was at Southern Miss at the time, and they were leaving Clemson with Coach Ford. And when they were there almost 3 or 4 weeks before I came on staff. So that relationship, I certainly remember Dabo. And one funny story, we had another receiver walk on, Roman. And when we went to the national championship game, they had some kind of player competition for a dance competition. And Roman ended up being our guy to go up there and represent our team, and he won the dance competition. So we always kidded that. I hadn't had a chance to get to him since I saw him dancing after a game one time, but he never was as good as Roman. We'd have to remind him of that.
People who were around then most certainly have an appreciation for you guys dismantling Miami in that national championship game, but like maybe younger people will just look at the score and say, okay, they beat Miami, but that was a monumental upset just because of what Miami was at that time. How did you guys do that?
Well, I think the biggest thing I noticed as we broke down the film is we were so much better than they were up front, our defensive front and their offensive front. And then we had no questions we would get pressure on the quarterback. The thing that Brother did such an outstanding job, he was very good with schemes and adjustments and so forth. And there were times we played 6 DBs in that game because they were, they had great wide receivers. And we had to play some aggressive man, but we needed other help out there as far as the speed of it. So we had some different personnel groupings that matched up with them. And a side note on that, Mickey Kahn, who's on the staff there at Clemson. Mickey was that 6th defensive back, played a lot in that game. He got a concussion in the game, or he would have played a tremendous number of reps. But anyhow, it was a good game. We didn't feel like it was going to be that big of an upset, but we had no clue we could go in and dominate them the way we did. But it sort of matched up well. They were a real dynamic team on both sides of the ball. Defensively, they weren't overpowering, but they were destructive. But our bread and butter was hammering the football. And so it took a little while offensively for us to gain control of it, but after a while we had complete control of the line of scrimmage. And defensively, we were able to cause enough turnovers and mistakes by the quarterback that they never really got on track. There was still some dangerous. They were able to score some points, but it wasn't. I think the thing about it is we might have been a double-digit underdog, but it was because Miami had been prolifically scoring all year, and we were kind of a low-scoring team. But there were games we would win 17-7 or something like that, and you go back and look at the statistics, we completely dominated the opponent. We just didn't beat them by 30 or 40. It just wasn't the nature of our attack.
Of course, y'all were coming off the inaugural SEC championship game in Birmingham and had edged out Florida in a great game. I guess it was on Langham's pick six was maybe the deciding touchdown in that one. How much did that game and that setting and those stakes in that SEC championship game prepare you guys for what you faced in New Orleans?
Well, it was a tremendous preparation. A lot of folks who listen to this thing may not even be old enough to remember that, but it was the first time any conference had had a championship game. And now, of course, it's commonplace. But that thing was so new and so built up and so unique that it almost got as much attention as the bowl games that were afterwards, and including our national championship game. But we came into that game, I think we were down around 6 or 7 or maybe even 5, somewhere like that in the national polls, and we weren't going to get to play Miami if we didn't win that game. We weren't going to the Sugar Bowl, first of all, to match up with them. So we're sitting there. I guess back then, I can't remember how many games we played back then. It was either 11 or 12. We're sitting there undefeated, perfect season, and we hadn't won anything yet. We hadn't won a conference title. We hadn't won a division title because there weren't any such thing then. And we hadn't won a national title. So we hadn't won a single thing, and we're sitting there undefeated. So that game was tremendously important because when we won it, it propelled us to the Sugar Bowl to play the number 1 team in the nation.
And then moving on, you mentioned that when you came back to Alabama after your stint at Clemson, that Dabo was a full-time assistant. I believe he was 26 when Gene Stallings made that decision, which was unheard of at the time for Coach Stallings to make such a young coach a full-time assistant. Can you maybe elaborate on just how rare that was for Stallings to make that call?
I will, but I'll go back even before that. Danny Pearman, who's on the Clemson staff. Danny came to Clemson from Clemson with Coach Ford the same year that Bill Oliver and Woody and we all came in 1990, and Danny was a grad assistant for 2 years, and we lost our offensive line coach. And Coach back then, Coach Stallings split the offensive line job. A little unusual, but one of our guys left for the NFL, and Coach gave Danny a shot. And I don't know how old he was because he'd been a GA at Clemson a year or so before he came down. So he could have been 30, but I think he was in his upper 20s when he started his first job and did a great job. He and Jim Fuller split the O-line, and we won the national championship his first year. So obviously he stepped in and did a fantastic job. A little bit very similar. Dabo, I wasn't there when Dabo was promoted, but when Coach Stallings made a change, or Mal Moore retired at the offensive coordinator position, he immediately moved Woody into that position. I think Woody had a tremendous amount of influence on hiring Dabo. He had him as a player. He'd probably been working with him, as a grad assistant, and he knew that he was capable of handling it. And, the only thing he didn't have experience with was recruiting. He'd already been coaching 2 or 3 years, and grad assistants could do a lot of coaching on the field. So although it was a little bit age-wise a little unusual, both of those guys came up through our program and knew the system and were already somewhat assisting the coach that they replaced. So it was a smooth transition, and obviously both really outstanding coaches. And the thing that they both did so well, though, is they jumped into the recruiting circus, if you will, and did a fantastic job in that area, too.
A great friend of the Clemson Dubcast and winner of the Clemson Area Chamber of Commerce Business of the Year Award, Founders Federal Credit Union. If you've been to a sporting event in Clemson, you've probably heard about Founders already. They are the official credit union partner of the Clemson Tigers, and all Clemson faculty, staff, and students are eligible for membership, as well as IPTAY members. Matt Gross is a proud Clemson alum and the vice president for the Clemson market for Founders Federal Credit Union. Membership at Founders has many benefits: great rates on loans and savings products, advice on investments and insurance products, and even a Clemson debit card available for any Founders member with a checking account. Founders Federal Credit Union is federally insured by the NCUA. If you're in Clemson, stop by and see Matt and his staff at 680 Old Greenville Highway, Suite 300, right next to the Walmart Neighborhood Market. Quick word about Uptown Realty LLC, headed up by Patrick Enzer, former sports writer who decided to get into the real estate game. Uptown Realty, locally owned and operated out of Sumter, but they serve the Eastern Midlands and PD area with the buying and selling of homes, commercial properties, and land. They also offer affordable new housing in the mid-130,000s from a local custom builder. Patrick is the sole owner and broker in charge. Grew up in Anderson, going to Clemson games, been in Sumter for 15 years, loyal Tiger Illustrated subscriber, loyal Dubcast listener. Website is uptownrealtysc.com.
You mentioned earlier that Dabo was ahead of the curve in recruiting. How so?
Well, I think he was just, back then, the recruiting cycle was not as year-round as it is now. You didn't have social media. A lot of the phone call rules were different. We could go on the road a little more frequently, but the number of times you were bringing kids to campus and so forth, it really wasn't that way back then. And I remember him having kids coming by the office more frequently than we did. And you didn't know the value of it back then because nobody could figure out, well, what's the big deal in having a kid come over here? We didn't have a game. But he understood the fact that recruiting was relationships, coaches and players, and just building those friendships, relationships, and that communication. So the fact that he was kind of a year-round recruiter at a time where it used to be sort of an off-on cycle back then. You evaluated players in the spring. You tried to get them to come to your camp that summer. And the little half-day, one-day camps weren't popular back then. Hardly anybody had them. There were nothing but passing camps for teams and then 5-day camps for high school kids. And so they would come, and you didn't really get as much evaluation on them as you did, trying to babysit all the younger kids in the dorm. But then also you came to the fall, it was time to see them play once or twice and then offer them. Of course, some of them were good enough you'd already offered, but it was very common back then that you didn't offer a player until his senior year. And then you worked like heck against the opposing recruiters to win him over and get him signed in February. And then it went dead a little bit, and you'd start back up in the spring. So it's kind of an off-on thing, and I just remember him being a little bit more continual, constantly working kids, younger kids coming to the campus, anything he could do to start building that relationship and that communication.
So I'm guessing your relationship with him really grew during that time when y'all were both assistants under DeBose from 97 to 2000?
We were good friends. We weren't particularly close because I was on the other side of the ball. We didn't spend a lot of time in the meeting rooms together. Age difference, different things like that. When I came back to Alabama in the late 90s, Dabo was still on staff, and I had married, and my wife was closer to their age, and we had our first child there, but we were a little bit closer then because our wives got to be friends, and we were spending more time with each other. Unfortunately, we didn't make it about 3 years that time, and then of course, Coach Dubose was terminated, and we all split up. But I know on my side, it's always been a very mutual respect, both professionally and personally. When I was at Mississippi State, we were going to open up against the University of South Carolina. So I told Dabo I wanted to come up and spend some time with Vic, their defensive coordinator. And Dabo was assistant coach at the time. So he said, well, y'all come on up during spring ball. I'll tell Vic you're coming. Y'all hang out as long as you want to. And we stayed at his house. So we stayed at Dabo's house for a few days. And I think our wives enjoyed seeing each other again. It was good catch up with him. Had a couple of good visits, chalk talks with Vic, got some ideas he thought were good against Steve. Most of them don't work, but you got to try something when you defend him. But that was really the last time I've seen him, spend any time with him. Of course, that's been a long time ago. But it's just always, I think, been a mutual respect, and I think the world of him as a person. And I always pick on him. I said, I don't know why people think you're so great. You're not even the nicest person in your own house. If you ever meet his wife, she was absolutely just a wonderful person.
Yes, yeah, you're so right on that. You know, with the DeBose tenure, you know, people just sort of casually look back and say, oh, didn't know what he was doing, failed tenure. But boy, that SEC championship, y'all killed Florida, and really. I guess that was 99. And really, when you think back to the offensive schematics that they had with Andrew Zhao, who was sort of a mobile quarterback, Sean Alexander, a lot of spread type stuff before the spread became in vogue. Am I making sense there? Am I right on that?
A little bit. We weren't running any kind of zone read or fast pace, but Sean was such a really great ball carrier. We gravitated away from the two-back and ran a lot of one-back stuff. So the spread element was usually 3 wideouts and a tight end, or 2 tight ends and 2 wideouts. But there was a lot of one-back sets to try to, move safeties out of the box and see if we could get a 6 or 7-man box against our 7-man or 8-man front. So it just, that's as much as I remember as far as innovation. Charlie Stubbs came in the last 2 years, I guess it was. We started doing a lot more of the quick screens outside, which was a little bit of an innovative thing that was coming in the ball back then. He brought some of it from BYU. And so that was the biggest thing. Defensively, we came in, they had been through an NCAA mess, and we were very bad. And we in 1 year recruited a defense that played for 2 years. And we were good on defense both that season and the season before. But we lost about 5 of those top 6 defensive linemen in the last season. We were very average up front. But we had a really good team that year. And unfortunately, didn't play well. Brady came back and beat us down in the Orange Bowl, which kind of put a bad ending on the season. But after our play in the SEC championship game, I thought we were about as good as anybody in the country. But we went down and just didn't play well down there.
So Dabo gets the head coaching job in the middle of the 2008 season, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts were at the time when you hear that news and as you're sort of following it. Well, I guess you're following it pretty closely given that you're at South Carolina at the time.
Well, I was a little bit, and we didn't have any direct contact, but some indirect. And I'll have to tell you one, I can't tell you who, but I've got a friend up there, and he was very, very close to Terry Don. And they would walk in the evenings a lot of times, or mornings, I don't know when, but they were just good personal friends. And this guy obviously was a pretty good booster too. And I knew exactly what was going on behind the scenes up there for a long time. There were a lot of folks that didn't know whether Dabo was going to get that job or not. I knew for 4 weeks that Terry Don had locked his feet and was not moving on, was not budging. And he even though they didn't finish fantastically, they finished well enough that he was able to convince them to give Dabo that shot. And then everybody all knows, and for the next 5 years, he couldn't beat Carolina. But Terry Don could see what was going on. He was building a program. His vision never wavered. I think he made 2 very critical decisions on his staff that showed he was a CEO and that he had command of his organization. They were very difficult decisions, but he made them, and he made them with a firm hand and moved on. But I do think that Terry Don's persistence, his unwavering support, kept that thing from going off the tracks, and he could see that Dabo had the thing going in the right direction. He wasn't going to let him mess that up.
Now, I've always been under the impression that when he did get the job for good, that he was interested in hiring you as the defensive coordinator, but there was a big buyout that you had in your contract. Can you maybe give a comment on that?
Well, there was never any official contact or anything. At that same time, Steve had a couple of things where we weren't positive he was going to return. So it was just, I guess, maybe 2 or 3 weeks of just not chaos, but things moving parts, if you will, that I was kind of keeping an eye on. But when I came to the University of South Carolina, one thing I requested was a 3-year contract because I had a very unusual situation with state employment. And those 3 years would give me a tremendous advantage with my retirement pension and so forth. So it was something important to me. Well, they'd never done that before, so I agreed to a double buyout. In other words, if they fired me, they had to keep me on for 3 years. If I left, I had to pay out that whole contract. And after the first year, they rolled it over. We played good defense that first year, and they rolled it over. And so I had a 3-year buyout, unless I went somewhere as a head coach. And that was pretty big money back then for an assistant coach. You just didn't pay out over $1 million to another school. So it was never a possibility that I know of. I don't think Clemson would have done that. And so I didn't pursue it aggressively. We just communicated third party and see what's going to happen at our place. And I had Steve decide it was time, he was ready to quit. Had he left, things would have been totally different, I guess. But we just had to let it all settle down, and it just went a different direction. But we never had any serious conversation about that. Again, I think it was always a mutual respect that we would like to work together again, but things just didn't work out that way.
Did you, obviously Clemson beating South Carolina in 2008 played a really big role in Dabo getting the job. Do you remember just on the field after that game, did you talk to him at all, like as far as not job or anything, but just congratulating him or anything like that?
No, I was in the box. I was most every year I was in the box, and I never saw him that day. We played terrible. We had some things that went on the week before the game, a couple of injuries, and then some other issues where players weren't focused. I didn't think we were going to play well when we went up there, and the overall game was kind of sloppy. But I don't know that sewed it up for him or not. I think Terry Don still intended to hire him. Maybe there would have been too much pressure had they lost that game. But, they played a lot better than we did, and I think he just felt like it was enough there to move forward on it, and he was determined for Dabo to be the leader.
Fast forward into 2009, I remember going into the Clemson game at South Carolina, talking to a few folks on the South Carolina side. They were sort of speculating that maybe, if the expected happened and Clemson won that game, because Clemson had just wrapped up the ACC, you guys were still kind of up and down, but it was speculated to me that, hey, maybe Spurrier hangs it up after this season if Clemson, comes down here and wins convincingly. And obviously that didn't happen. Hugely pivotal moment, it seemed, or juncture, it seems, in the rivalry sort of turning into the South Carolina direction. Do you feel that way too, that was a pivotal moment?
I guess so. We were not a great football team that year, and defensively we were a little bit hot and cold. We lost our front, and we were not very physical up front. We had some really good perimeter players, but it was a convincing win. And I think the only thing that game really kind of brought to light the difference in the two schedules, because they had won the ACC and were fairly dominant, and we were struggling in the SEC. But the people we were playing week in and week out, we felt like we could play with Clemson. So it wasn't a shock to us that we were able to beat them. But I think our players at that time, of course, most of them had beaten Clemson off and on before then, but I think our players were confident and so forth, and that's the main thing. So it was a big win, and, of course, it started with 5 in a row. And it really got to the point, I think it maybe helped recruit a little bit in state. Everybody always asked that question. But we already had some really good kids. We'd signed Gilmore and Holloman and Alshon, some of those guys in that class. They were playing in that game, or at least on the team. And some of them played very well, too, so it boded well for the future. And it could have been what you're saying. It could have been a defining turning point in that series. I don't know. I think they had tremendous seasons right on down. So it wasn't like it hurt their program. They were doing really well even in those 5 years.
You mentioned how close some of the families have been, and I think, isn't it the Piermans are really close to the Lorenzo Ward's family, and maybe some other just really good relationships that crossed the rivalry lines during that time?
Yeah, well, so much of it, we all had time back at Alabama together.
Yep.
Lorenzo was on our 1990 team, and then he left and coached high school ball a year or two. Then he came back in 1993, and he actually was coming back to help Bill Oliver in the secondary as a grad assistant. But that was the year that I was diagnosed with cancer right before the season began. And so Coach moved Lorenzo, keep wanting to say whammy, but he moved Lorenzo over with me. And he was like my right-hand man. And I was able to come to practice every day, didn't miss any games. But towards the end of the season, he did a tremendous amount of the individual periods and some of that kind of thing. So we had a very close relationship, obviously. And then he was a teammate of Dabo. And they both were walk-ons that earned scholarships. So both Alabama kids, born and raised over there. So they were very close. Of course, Pierman was on our staff all that time, and I'm sure they got to be friends. But everybody, Woody McCoy, of course, was there. And everybody had that background where we were on the same staff over at Alabama. And that's not unusual in this profession. They're guys that are on opposing staffs that used to work together all over the country. And it's kind of a profession where you got to try to beat the other guy, but there's never this disrespect or anything underhanded because you've worked with them before, or you'll probably end up working with them somewhere in the future. And so that's not that unusual, but there were a lot of good friendships that extended from there. Lemansky Hall, who's also on the staff there. Lemansky played outside linebacker for me at Alabama and was on that national championship team. I'm really close to him and usually catch up with him once a year and visit a little bit. But he's done a wonderful job. But yeah, there are a lot of guys that have that common thread back on that staff and so forth in those years that are really good friends, both coaching-wise and personally.
I think I remember, I've always recalled a gathering you had with the media after one of y'all's wins up here where somebody asked you, how great is this? It must have been 2010 because that was the first back-to-back wins by South Carolina in the series since like the early 70s. And somebody asked you, how great is this to beat them second year in a row? And you said, it's hard to really enjoy it when you know, something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, hard to totally enjoy it when you know how much some folks on the other side are hurting. Am I getting that right?
A little bit. I used to say some stupid stuff post-game. But, Steve's process, Steve always handled the first meeting, but he always thought his defense coordinator had to come in and have a press conference because he felt like that's the way he structured it as far as the way we coached it. So anyhow, I a lot of times said things after games and go back and look at the stats to see if it made any sense. But what I was trying to say is that week was never like getting ready to play the national championship game and you about fired up 4 weeks before the game. You have to keep yourself from getting too excited or whatever. And then you go into it like you're in a championship boxing match and you come out of it victoriously and you just can't, you're joyous. That week was never that way for me. And it just was because I'd coached at both places. I have a lot of close friends at both places. I had coaching friends on the other team, and the pressure was always there. I didn't necessarily feel it from the outside, but it was always a lot of pressure on me in that game. And I guess the best way to describe it, it was like somebody just sticking a pin in a balloon and the air coming out. When the game was over, it was like somebody just stuck a pin in the balloon and all the pressure was gone.
Wow.
And then, 2 or 3 days later, I'd probably look at some of it and grin. But at that moment, it was just really good to win the game and get that pressure off and quit worrying about it. But I never have been a big celebrator.
You're just exhausted at that point.
Sort of. I mean, I'm just glad it was over. And, I'm not trying to say I didn't want it to go my way. Well,
right.
I'm just saying it was going to go my way, but it was a lot of pressure. And when it was over, I was glad it was over.
Over the year we've been doing the Dubcast, we've developed a great relationship with the folks over at the Abernathy Boutique Hotel. In addition to being a great meeting spot for our interviews we conduct with local personalities, it's also a fantastic place to stay. The Abernathy is rolling out a loyalty savings program for 2019. After your third stay, you'll automatically be rewarded with an exclusive offer that can be applied to future reservations for the remainder of the year. 15% off rooms, 15% off food and beverage at Taps Bar and Cafe. Learn more at theabernathy.com. If you run a business that conducts credit card transactions with customers, you got to learn about Tandem Payment. Credit Card Processing Company has offices throughout the Southeast, but the one in Greenville in the upstate, headed up by a 2005 Clemson grad. Tandem's technology allows business owners to offset their credit card processing costs by applying a small customer service charge to each sale they make. Tandem has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and was awarded the Better Business Integrity Award in 2013. Check them out at tandempayment.com.
The Spurrier offenses you defended, or tried to defend at Florida when he was at Florida, and you were at Alabama, a lot different from the approaches that he had when he was at South Carolina. What's your, insight into the adapting that he had to do to make that offense hard to defend, sort of in a different era of offenses?
Well, initially when he came to South Carolina, it was not different. He was still a lot of two-back. He'd run the draw. He'd run the draw pass. His routes were more intermediate and deeper than other people you coached against. He took a lot of 7-step drops off of the play actions and max protect and throw the ball deep, pocket passes. What changed is when his quarterbacks became a skill set that he needed to adjust to. And actually, our younger coaches on the staff kept trying to tell him we need to get to some of this stuff because the running quarterbacks were giving everybody so much trouble about that time. And, he gradually adapted to it. He could teach it, coach it. I mean, I've never been around a guy, but he's almost like a genius, and he may even be a genius. But he made things so simple, and I think the genius was in his simplicity. A lot of people do a lot of stuff in the workday, and a lot of stuff in their offensive approach, and they're studying opponents, and they almost make it too complicated. He sees the simplicity in everything. And it wasn't exactly what he ran, it was when he ran it. His timing on play calling, his adjustments, he would know what you were doing, and it didn't take him a series or a halftime adjustment to go to something. He went to it the next play. So when you were coaching against him, you almost had to try to stay a step ahead of him, and it was hard, if not impossible, to do that consistently. But one in particular, everybody I'm sure refers to is Connor Shaw, and Steve really had to get comfortable because when you call a pass play, and you know it's there, and you got it a certain way you've coached it, and he pulls the ball down and runs for 17 yards, well, it's a great play. But you're losing the continuity of your play calling because had he hit that route, you know exactly what you're going to go to the next play to come off of that. And you're setting the defense up as well as trying to run a good play. Well, Connor would pull it down and run for 15 yards and move the sticks, and he'd have to kind of regenerate his thought process. But he adapted to it pretty quickly, and obviously that was one of the more successful offensive runs he had with Connor Shaw.
So what was it that made the fun and gun offense sort of antiquated? Why wouldn't it work in that different era?
We didn't quite have the players that he had at Florida, and I think in the right places. We did at one time, like Garcia could throw any ball on the field. He obviously also wasn't consistent, at times, but it wasn't a talent thing. But once we lost him, Connor was not what we will say is a pocket NFL passer. He could throw the ball well. He was accurate, but he couldn't throw any ball on the field. He couldn't throw certain routes across the field. He couldn't throw a ball that was so deep, etc. He was a little shorter. He didn't see quite as well. So you have to adjust to things like that. He was a lot better on the move, and he was a lot better beating you with his feet and extending plays. But to throw from the pocket on a 7-step drop, and what you asked, well, what's the big deal about the 7-step drop? When you're taking a 7-step drop, you're obviously going to have longer to throw the football, at least it's designed that way. And so you can run routes that are harder to cover out in the perimeter, and you can get people open, get separation a lot easier. And Steve was a master at knowing where to throw the ball before the route broke. And he taught it that way. And a player had to be able to read the secondary to know where to throw the ball. And a lot of times when coaching against him, the quarterback would turn a ball loose, and I'd wonder who he's throwing it to, and then the guy would come out of his break, and it would be a perfect strike, maybe a corner route. And then he would run a seam route up through the middle of what we used to call a bender. And the quarterback would throw the football, and the route wasn't even where the ball was going, but it would bend, and it would hit it right on time. It was because of the way he coached it, the way he taught it. Some kids could never get comfortable with that. They had to see the route to let it go. And it's too late then, unless you got a gun. It's too late. You're going to get picked. So it was some different things like that. He just had to adjust a little bit out of it when his skill set of his players didn't match up to it.
What has been your opinion and thoughts on the job Brent Venables has done through the years, the consistently great defenses he's been able to put out there, even amid lots of attrition, losing a bunch of elite players?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect question for just like this, at this time, especially because, last year when all those kids came back, Mother Teresa might could have coached them and had a top 10 defense. Who knows? But all those guys leave, and they're recruiting well, so they got some players coming, but all those guys leave, and they've still been statistically just as effective. And I think he's been a little more aggressive, in attacking, but he's using the skill set of the players he's got. Some of it, I think, gets a little high risk. You got to watch it when you get somebody who can scat backs out of the backfield and get the ball out of their hands. Really, really smart quarterback that can see things and burn you on pressure defenses. But at the same time, that's what fits those players. They're not extremely dominant up front, but they've got good quickness and aggressiveness, and they're talented in the back this year that allows them to be a little more aggressive. Some people like North Carolina did a good job early on with double moves. They were able to hold the ball just long enough to get it out. Of course, they beat them on the deep ball very early in the game. They also hurt them with backs out of the backfield. So it's when you bring in all that pressure, you got linebackers having to pick up backs that slip out of the backfield. And you're counting on them not being able to get out, but a good scheme and a good system can get them out. And when they do, it's very difficult to cover them. And sometimes they're left uncovered. And when they are in man coverage, that's a big explosive play. But he's been, I think, phenomenal. And I've said it during the course of the year on my radio spots is I think it's been the most consistent thing at Clemson. And during a period of time where Trevor wasn't playing his best and had a few picks or something like that, they were never in danger of losing a football game because their defense still had control of the game. The other thing they do such a great job of is they make series very short. They don't have 8, 9, 10-play drives and a missed field goal. They get on the field. They usually cause a negative play, and they get off, and they have a lot of 3-and-outs. And 3-and-outs put a tremendous amount of pressure on the other defense because it's hard to make adjustments, and it's hard to keep your stamina and so forth with your conditioning when you're back on the field with 1 minute and 20 seconds gone off the wristwatch. So what they're doing defensively, I think, has been the key to this season overall.
Virginia was very creative in using formations and shifts motions to get the right matchups with Clemson's back-end guys, particularly Tanner Muse. It would seem that Ohio State, in particular, and then possibly LSU, thinking of a national championship matchup, have the precise talent and schematics that you were talking about earlier to stress this defense in ways they haven't been stressed to date. Do you see that as well?
Well, I've kind of moved into the area now that I'm not informed because I'm just going to be perfectly honest with you. I haven't watched Ohio State play this year more than maybe a half. I didn't watch much of their game last week. I didn't see much of the Clemson-Virginia game, to be honest with you. But if they can run the football effectively, and by that I mean make Clemson continue to have to play the run all day long and respect it with their calls, then I think the Fields kid's good enough to make plays. And I don't know how good their receivers are. I think Clemson's really good in the secondary, but if you're covering one-on-one man all day long, it gets tough, and you better get some pressure on the quarterback. So I'm really not a good person to evaluate that. I see where the bookies have got Clemson favored, and those guys aren't wrong very often. They make a living. Somehow they make a living doing that. But on a serious note, all those teams are capable of beating each other. I think Clemson's got a lot of advantages going in because I've said this before, and this is not a knock on Clemson. This is a statement of definition on the ACC. There's not the commitment in that conference, football-wise, financially and facilities and so forth. The fan bases, it's obviously just not that big of a deal at some of those schools. And so Clemson doesn't have to play all their players and play their best every week on that schedule. And I think it makes them a little bit fresher and a little bit deeper and a little bit less guys out of the lineup right now than maybe those other teams. LSU's been through an absolute war zone this year. And I think they've stayed pretty healthy, but they've got to be a little bit fatigued. These layoff weeks, should help. But when you have these 2 and 3 week layoffs, sometimes you lose the timing element of your offense and those kind of things. So I think Clemson has a lot of advantages in this playoff system, and it's a tip of the hat to them for making the commitment as an institution and getting into that picture where they're there every year. And I don't know what changes that unless Clemson changes it, because I don't see anybody in the ACC that's capable of changing it.
What are you thinking when you're watching Trevor Lawrence throw the football? Not just throw the football, but manage the game and use his legs, and it just seems like the total package that's really hard to stop when you combine that and Travis Etienne and then those receivers.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, you can't leave out the offensive line. Robbie Caldwell never gets enough credit.
Yeah.
There are times where offensive line doesn't dominate, but there are times where everybody's offensive line doesn't dominate in the NCAA. But that's I think has been a huge key to it. But what you're asking is such an advantage because they've got some design runs, some counters, some gap plays where it's going to be handed to the running back and he's going to run the football. And that's, you got to have a little power football in there. But then if that's being taken away, somebody's loading the box or somebody's movement, something, they're hitting some run blitzes at the right time. Now all of a sudden Trevor pulls the ball and you've got to have somebody to account for him. Or they run a play action and they throw a deep ball with 2 NFL receivers running down the field. And you've loaded the box to stop the running game, and you got problems out there. You got to put a kid out there and see if he can stop this NFL receiver 4 times a game. Usually you're going to lose 2 of those. So it's a very balanced attack, a very dangerous attack. He had a little spell in there where he wasn't playing his best. I don't know, it looked like some things he didn't read very well, maybe 2nd, 3rd, 4th ball games of the year. But it was more like it wasn't pressure on him. It was like he thought he saw something and he made a mistake and he threw into coverage. Or, and I think he's had some times where he's be throwing high a little bit. A lot of those things are caused by having to run the football. I don't think they're afraid to run him, but I think the more you run the quarterback against these type teams, you're getting ready to play, they get hit, and if they don't get hurt or dinged up, they get tired. And when they get tired, it affects their accuracy. And when it affects their accuracy, that's where you get a bad ball. and a turnover. So running the football is really hard for a defensive coach to stop it and have to worry about it. But you don't want to have to do that all day because eventually it's going to affect other parts of the offense.
Did you watch the Clemson-South Carolina game a couple of weeks ago?
I watched some of it.
Gotcha.
I have a hard time watching the game. It's just so hard to sit and watch a whole game for me. I get so impatient. You get so used to making adjustments and making decisions about the game as a coach, and then you also, when you're watching film, you may run something back 5 times. You may watch it one time and move on, but you've got control of the situation. And now you sit here and watch it on TV, and it's just something I haven't ever gotten comfortable with. I can't sit there. I watch more NFL games now when we got former players in them. I'll sit down and watch them just to watch those guys and usually get through the whole game. But it's so hard for me to watch a college football game now and go through the whole thing. I can't do it.
Best defensive player you ever coached?
Well, I didn't have him long, but it was probably Clowney.
Mm-hmm.
I only had him as a freshman. The other best is Gilmore, but he was, he may not have been at Carolina because he was still really learning the position, but now he's one of the more dominant players in that league now. The most talented overall player I think I've ever been around is Melvin Ingram. Mm-hmm. Melvin could punt, he could throw. Melvin was unbelievable. People may not remember it. We went over to Athens one day, and we ran a fake punt with Melvin as a personal protector, and he ran a 71-yard touchdown.
Oh, yes, that was amazing.
And we left. The return guy came up to tackle him. He was one of the best defensive backs on the team. He left him on the sideline on his knees. He would run over him. He put a move on him. Melvin was unbelievable. It's not surprising to me that he's dominating the NFL. But he could do anything. He could throw a ball 70 yards.
Big supporter of the Clemson Dubcast is Harris Flooring America. Based in Anderson, South Carolina, Harris Flooring has been instrumental in a lot of the facilities transformation you've seen on Clemson's campus lately. From the Allen Reeves Center to the McFadden Building to Memorial Stadium to the Neary Center. Family owned and operated since 1947. The owner, Scott Junkins, big Clemson guy. Harris Flooring is just as good inside the home and the residential realm as they are with the larger scale commercial stuff. Give them a call, 864-642-6183 or online at flooringamerica-anderson.com.
Last January, Clemson puts up 44 on Alabama, and it felt like Armageddon. This year, it's become more like a trend with LSU scoring 46. Auburn's mediocre offense went up and down the field on Alabama. Is this a major reckoning for Nick Saban as he tries to get the defense back to what he is used to?
Oh, I don't think anybody's going to have consistently defenses that dominate like they used to. It's just the game has kept spreading out more and more and more. And one of the factors a lot of people don't realize, these kids are growing up doing that stuff, okay, all year long. Passing camps and perimeter competitions between high schools and stuff they're like basketball camps used to be. And so kids are coming to college able to run routes and throw routes and do things, in the passing game that you had to teach them for 2 or 3 years in college before they became real proficient at it. But now they come out of high school running routes as good as some of the pros do and understanding the passing game. And some of the rules have changed over the years that enable a little bit. One of the rules being able to block downfield when that ball's thrown behind the line of scrimmage. That's a huge advantage. But I just don't think, maybe one particular year you'll have a talent group that you got good enough in those 5 or 6 guys in the box. You can play with 6 in the box and stop the run. If you can play with 6 in the box and stop the run, then you can cut down on some of those pass plays back there. But most of them are coming off of times where you get a little running game going and you got to play 7 in the box to be accountable on the run. And somewhere out there there's going to be a one-on-one matchup, even in zone. So I just don't think those days are ever coming back. I don't think Alabama's in place to say that. He lost 2 senior linebackers before the season started, and they didn't have the typical Alabama depth. And I thought that's what happened last year. I didn't get to see a single play of that championship game, but I was traveling. But, I mean, Clemson had 31 yards, I think, at the half, and they'd already scored 20-something points, 30 points. So it didn't matter how physical they were up front. They were throwing the ball over their head. They could not generate any pass rush. And it's because they lost 2 or 3 of their players. They didn't put any pressure on quarterbacks in the last half of the season. Nobody's defense is going to be very good in these times if you can't rush the quarterback with 4 people. So I don't think that there's anything to worry about the fact that they've imploded. I just think they had a season like some of their opponents have been having. Unfortunate injuries. All of a sudden, you ain't got the best players. Somebody else has got a little bit better players than you do, and the results are going to be what they were.
Last question. The stars really aligned for y'all at South Carolina recruiting with Clowney, Gilmore, Jeffrey, a bunch of those guys when Clemson was going through the turnover at the head coaching spot. Just curious, with Clemson doing what it's doing in recruiting, with Georgia doing what it's doing in recruiting, and now with North Carolina a factor again in recruiting, how hard is it going to be for South Carolina to really get a foothold in the area of high-level recruiting that ushered in their most recent run of success with you guys and Spurrier?
It makes it a lot tougher. I don't think it is the end game, but I think it does make it a lot tougher. I used to, having coached at Auburn, it used to be the same thing. Auburn's a tremendous program, but you got the best program in America up there in the northern part of Alabama. You got one of the best programs in the South, about 150, 200 miles. You're on the Georgia line, and then you got Florida. You know, those are where you get your players at Auburn. And you got Georgia on there, you know, on a hot streak. You got Florida coming back now. You got Florida State sitting right in the Panhandle, just made a huge change, I think, for the good. And then you got Alabama sitting there. Where do you go get your players? Same thing with South Carolina. South Carolina has a tremendous advantage. They're in a great conference, one of the best towns, college towns you could ever find. They've got an international airport sitting right there. There are tremendous advantages they have. They just got to get some kind of consistency in their vision and decide how good they want to be. I think they want to compete. I know they want to win, but sometimes it takes a little bit more, and it takes a little bit of excess, if you will. And I think that the teams that do it end up getting a return on the dollar. But it's a tough recruiting job, but it's also in many ways an easy recruiting job. I've never had any problem recruiting the University of South Carolina. I had a little bit of advantage on those kids you were mentioning because my first coaching jobs were Gaffney and Spartanburg, and I coached in that I-85 league with all the Rock Hill schools and so forth. I had a lot of good friends, a lot of relationships in there. I didn't have to come in and build relationships, but it was still a battle to try to get them and get them to stay home. But every one of those kids will tell you today they were glad about their decision. They enjoyed the time they played there, and every one of them in the pros. And Lane Kiffin thought they were going to be pumping gas, but most of them are not.
Last question. I lied. Who wins it all this year?
Now, that's a hard one. I mean, how can you make that pick?
Yeah.
I happened to watch the other day. I was almost impressed with Oklahoma's defense, and that's what everybody has said this year was going to be their Achilles heel. I don't think Baylor's a good offensive team. They don't have a definite quarterback, but that's impossible to pick. I don't know how you pick against LSU, but I'll say this. Clemson's got an argument for having balance on both sides. They can beat you defensively or they can beat you offensively if you're not having a good day on those other sides of the ball. LSU, I think their defense is underrated. I think they're a heck of a lot better on that side of the ball than people think they are. But they haven't proven week in and week out they can shut people down. So I think Clemson's got as good as Ohio State, supposed to be the most balanced overall. But I don't know if I saw the dynamic players on their team that maybe Clemson has. But we'll see. I couldn't possibly predict that, but I think Clemson's got as good a shot as anybody.
Ellis Johnson, you've been very generous with your time, and, man, get back in the game. You are too good to be sitting on the couch watching football.
Well, I appreciate that. I do miss it, and I'm bored to death, and I'm in good health, and I'd like to coach again. You're going to have to be on a certain level to put that kind of time into it, but I really do miss it, and I enjoy these things too, Larry, so I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you, and it was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. We'll have to have you back on. I will certainly keep in touch.
Okay, thank you, man.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, that was great. That was really a lot of fun hearing a lot of those stories, and also the type of insight that only a seasoned football mind can give. So thanks to Ellis for sharing an hour of his time. Also, thanks to our sponsors, most notably title sponsor Parham Smith and Arts & Hull Law Firm in downtown Greenville, and most of all, thanks to all of you for making this part of your weekly listening routine. We'll see you next week. Cheers.